My wife and I have decided to homeschool our 7-year-old boy, and the big question, of course, is why. I could give you 100 specific reasons, but I think it'd be best if I just take the time to give you 2 general reasons why we have decided to homeschool. Reason number 1, when I first started to learn about homeschooling, it was very appealing to me. I liked the idea a lot, but it seemed somewhat radical until I started to compare homeschooling versus traditional school. In homeschooling, you have a mom and a dad who are investing their time in their child to educate them at home in a loving environment. In the traditional school, you have a mom and a dad sending their kid away for 6 or more hours a day so that they can be educated by strangers. Once I made this comparison like that, suddenly homeschooling did not seem radical at all, but rather the traditional school approach seemed radical. And I can remember what it felt like the first time I sent Johnny to kindergarten. It was going to be a full day of school for him. And I remember what it felt like when I realized that if you don't include the time that he is asleep, he will be spending more time at school with his teachers and his classmates than he was going to be spending at home with his mom and his dad and his little brother. And he was 5 years old. 5 years old. That did not set well with me. I just concluded at some point, I just don't think that is the way that God intended families to work. So that is reason number 1. Reason number 2, I think that the traditional school system is just an inefficient way to educate children. You got one teacher, 20 students. This is just not a workable situation. And I think this is confirmed by the fact that in that environment, when it's time for the students to focus, when it's time for them to really learn something, what does the teacher usually do? They'll break them down into smaller groups. Because the 20 students and one teacher is just not a good way to teach. So they break them down into smaller groups. And then after that, if there is a student that is still struggling in some way, what's the next step? They'll go to a one-on-one situation, maybe a tutor. So the 20 students to one teacher doesn't work. They break them down into smaller groups. And then if a student still needs more help, they go down to a one-on-one situation. Well, I say just skip over the 20-to-1 ratio and the small groups and go right to that one-on-one situation. And also, if you have a larger family, maybe multiple kids of the same age or the same academic level, you can still sort them out into smaller groups, and that'll work out for you. And one last thing, I think if you put 20 or more 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, or 7-year-olds, 20 or more young kids in a classroom and try to tell them to sit still, you're just asking for behavior problems. That is a recipe for disaster. And I think that situation makes it that much harder for the teacher and the student. The teacher will spend more time some days dealing with behavior issues than they do actually teaching. So the 20-to-1 ratio, the traditional classroom setting, is inefficient and it's a recipe for misbehavior. That's reason number 2. Now I want to deal with one other issue before ending this, and that is this. When you tell somebody you are homeschooling, one of the first concerns they seem to have is, what about your child's social life? It is as if you don't send your kid to school, they're not going to have any opportunities to socialize. I think that's kind of crazy. If that was the case, that would mean that they don't socialize after school. They never socialize on the weekends. And what about the 3 months of summer break that they're not in school at all? Are they not socializing at all then? That doesn't seem right to me, because when I was a kid, I remember my best socializing moments, my best social experiences were after school, on the weekends, and during the summer, when I wasn't trapped inside of that classroom. I remember sitting in a classroom when I was a kid, and that's all I wanted to do was socialize. And the teachers were constantly telling me to be quiet and telling my classmates to be quiet. The teachers seemed to spend quite a bit of time actually trying to get people to be quiet and not socialize. They would even use the phrase, and I heard this 100 times, this is not social hour, it's time to learn, so be quiet. Now, of course, at school, you'll have recess and lunch and other extracurricular activities that will allow the kids to have a better opportunity for quality socialization. But even in those environments, even at recess, kids have a tendency to break down into smaller groups. Just like in the classroom, the teacher breaks them down into smaller groups. Well, you put them out at recess, they don't play with all 20 other kids or 50 other kids. They find their friends, they have a small group of friends, and they play with them and they socialize with them. And so, again, you don't need to put your kid in a group of 20 other kids their same age or 50 or 100 other kids close to their same age for them to learn how to socialize. And also, I think there is a case to be made that if your child is going to spend large portions of the day around kids the same age as him, that might actually slow down his maturity process. I don't want my son to be 7 years old the rest of his life. So I think it's best for him to spend a little time around some kids that are a little older than him, and teenagers and even adults, and some kids younger than him. It's all a process of him maturing. And I think homeschooling gives your child a better opportunity to do just that. And by the way, I have spent some time around homeschooled children, and I have never once, not once, have I noticed them to be socially inept. In fact, if anything, they seem to be more mature and have better social skills. Now, of course, that's just anecdotal, but in my experience, that has consistently been the case. And so that is it for this first recording. My next recording will be an explanation, an update, if you will, on how the process is going. That's all. Thanks for listening.